Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Thank you for stopping by. Let me start with some macro thoughts. China and Japan are slowly reducing their holdings of US bonds. China now at a 7-month low, Japan at a 7-year low. This chart is via Richard Leong 2. I think this is overblown. There are lots of concerns that what happens if China dumps all these bonds. I think China it's a catch-22 for China. To dump those bonds is really, it's not going to happen unless they go to war or something like that. The Chinese yuan is very near now to a 10-year low. This chart is from David Inglis. Take a look. Obviously the Chinese are letting the yuan slide as a response to Trump's tariff war. 9th of July, I asked Trump's tariff wars, who blinks first? I said President Trump, after bashing on Justin Trudeau of Canada and Mexico's Enrique Peña Nieto, now upended of course, and then firing a few broadsides at Europe, has now turned his attention to Xi Jinping and thrown him the keys, challenging him to a cheeky run. Today's China-US graphic is brought to you by Richard Marks via David Inglis. And this is why I was saying Trump's aggressive, coercive foreign economic policy is the signature success of this administration. It is highly effective. China is in retreat, look at that chart, notwithstanding some bravura talk. Trump can keep it up, it's working a treat. That's what I think. Chinese leaders can be forgiven for seething about this declaration of economic warfare. I've said severally that Trump, who remains a linguistic warfare specialist, has proven a skilled, coercive, sanction warfare specialist. On trade, Trump is disrupting the Chinese supply chain bigly. We learned the seriousness of that effort trade agreements that were struck with Mexico and Canada, where there's an anti-dragging clause that was inserted in there. This caught my attention from via Pinecone Macro. Quote, "Raid China, you can't taper a Ponzi." Interesting point. My weekend piece was "War is Coming," and I put that on YouTube as well under the same title. 17th of September, I said the dollar is seriously weaponized, the US economy is blowing hot, and yesterday's Fed minutes confirmed the same. The Bloomberg dollar index starting to look better if it can hold with another higher highs. That's from Sunny Chartist. Returning to that story of Rabindranath Tagore, I said his short stories are like jewels, but oftentimes bittersweet. And this is a classic one. This is the story of this fellow who's occupying this palace, 250-year-old palace. He is hearing voices. It's kind of sensual. It's incredible. Then I was filled with a lively fear that it was the muse that had taken advantage of my solitude and possessed me. The witch had evidently come to ruin a poor devil like myself, making a living by collecting cotton duties. I decided to have a good dinner. It is the empty stomach that all sorts of incurable diseases find an easy prey. I sent for my cook and gave orders for a rich, sumptuous Mughal dinner, redolent of spices and ghee. Leaving my report unfinished, I rose, put on my solar hat, and startling the dark, shady, desolate path with the rattle of my carriage, I reached the vast, silent palace, standing on the gloomy skirts of the hills. On the first floor, the stairs led to a very spacious hall, its roof stretching wide over ornamental arches, resting on 3 rows of massive pillars, and groaning day and night under the weight of its own intense solitude. The day had just closed and the lamps had not yet been lighted. As I pushed the door open, a great bustle seemed to follow within, as if a throng of people had broken up in confusion and rushed out through the doors and windows and corridors and verandas and rooms to make its hurried escape. As I saw no one, I stood bewildered, my hair on end in a kind of ecstatic delight, and a faint scent of attar and unguents, almost effected by age, lingered in my nostrils. Standing in the darkness of that vast, desolate hall, between the rows of those ancient pillars, I could hear the gurgle of fountains splashing on the marble floor, a strange tune on the guitar, the jingle of ornaments and the trinkle of anklets, the clang of bells tolling the hours, the distant note of nahabat, the din of the crystal pendants of chandeliers shaken by the breeze, the song of bulbuls from the cages in the corridors, the cackle of storks in the gardens, all creating round me a strange, unearthly music. Then I came under such a spell that its intangible, inaccessible, unearthly vision appeared to be the only reality in the world, and all else a mere dream. I fell asleep, or how long I slept, but I suddenly awoke with a start, though I heard no sound and saw no intruder. Only the steady, bright star on the hilltop had set, and the dim light of the new moon was stealthily entering the room through the open window, as if ashamed of its intrusion. I saw nobody, but felt as if someone was gently pushing me. As I awoke, she said not a word, but beckoned me with her 5 fingers bedecked with rings to follow her cautiously. I got up noiselessly, and though not a soul save myself was there in the countless apartments of that deserted palace, with its slumbering sounds and waiting echoes, I feared at every step lest any should wake up. Most of the rooms of the palace were always kept closed, and I never entered them. I followed, breathless and with silent steps, my invisible guide. I cannot now say where. What endless dark and narrow passages, what long corridors, what silent and solemn audience chambers and close secret cells I crossed. Though I could not see my fair guide, her form was not visible to my mind's eye. An Arab girl, her arms hard and smooth as marble, visible through her loosened sleeves, a thin veil calling on her face from the fringe of her cap, and a curved dagger at her waist. Methought that one of the 1,001 Arabian Nights had been wafted to me from the world of romance, and that at the dead of night I was wending my way through the dark, narrow alleys of slumbering Baghdad to a trysting place fraught with peril. At last my fair guide stopped abruptly before a great blue screen and seemed to point to something below. There was nothing there, but a sudden dead froze the blood in my heart. Methought I saw there on the floor at the foot of the screen a terrible Negro eunuch dressed in rich brocade, sitting and dozing with outstretched legs, with a naked sword on his lap. My fair guide lightly tripped over his legs and held up a fringe of the screen. I could catch a glimpse of a part of the room spread with a Persian carpet. Someone was sitting inside on a bed. I could not see her, but only caught a glimpse of 2 exquisite feet in gold-embroidered slippers, hanging out from loose saffron-coloured pyjamas and placed idly on the orange-coloured velvet carpet. On one side there was a bluish crystal tray on which a few apples, pears, oranges, and bunches of grapes in plenty, 2 small cups and a gold-tinted decanter were evidently waiting the guest. A fragrant, intoxicating vapour issuing from a strange sort of incense that burned within almost overpowered my senses. Then followed a great discord between my days and nights. During the day I would go to my work, worn and tired, cursing the bewitching night and her empty dreams. But as night came, my daily life, with its bonds and shackles of work, would appear a petty, false, ludicrous vanity. After nightfall I was caught and overwhelmed in the snare of strange intoxication. I would then be transformed into some unknown personage of a bygone age, playing my part in unwritten history. And my short English coat and tight breeches did not suit me in the least. With a red velvet cap on my head, loose pyjamas, an embroidered vest, a long flowing silk gown, and coloured handkerchiefs scented with glitter, I would complete my elaborate toilet, sit on a high-cushioned chair, and replace my cigarette with a many-coiled nargileh filled with rose water, as if in eager expectation of a strange meeting with the beloved one. Sorry, I really like Tagore and kind of like that story. I imagine myself there and him, in point of fact. And there's one more part to go, so we'll get to that tomorrow. Reflecting on a spectacular Wildlife Wednesday at Vumbura Plains, Swamp Lion. This is the Okavango Delta. Look at this photograph and the reflection, it's tremendous. "Oh, smell the people," yelled Dean with his face out of the window, sniffing. "Ah, God, life." Indeed. It's so short. Amboseli sunsets this year have been out of this world. This photo is by Andreas Fox, and indeed it's a marvellous one. Record rainfall from March to May filled up the ancient lake bed and allowed for dormant grass seeds to finally germinate after years of drought. This is a photograph of Fort Jesus that I took a few years ago, and it is a wonderful and tremendous place. Theresa May apparently spoke for 15 minutes. Some EU leaders were left puzzled. India. The alleged murder of Mr. Khashoggi is only the latest of a series of Saudi ventures since 2015 that have failed to turn out as planned. You can say that again. The alleged murder of Mr. Khashoggi, the list includes a stalemated war in Yemen that has almost provoked a famine, escalation in Syria that provoked Russian military intervention, the blockade of Qatar, and the detention of the Lebanese Prime Minister Saad Hariri. And in November last year, I said, in all the history books I've read, it's probably wisest to operate on one front, not two, and certainly not three. Saudi Arabian Prince of Death, Mohammed bin Salman, who has graduated from chopping hands and heads in public plazas to dismembering bodies in overseas consulates. Barbaric, and the NSA heard all of this live while it was happening. Over the weekend, I said the KSA is signaling loud and clear that its wannabe king is simply not tenable. He was already unconscionable, I know. Article 6 of the anti-cybercrime law stipulates a maximum 5 years in prison and a maximum fine of $800,000 for sharing rumors or fake news that breach public order, religious values, public morals, and privacy. "I'm shaking now, literally," says a Saudi businessman, vacillating between fear and disbelief. Exile dissidents are sharing stories of what they now believe were attempts to lure and arrest them. Abdullah Alaoud, 34, the son of a cleric facing trial in Riyadh, has lived in the US for almost a decade. "They tried to make me return in one way or another, but it was obvious that it was a trap," he says. When his passport was about to expire last year, he applied for renewal at the embassy in Washington and was told his services were frozen and he couldn't renew it without going back to the kingdom. Alaoud says he maintained US residency because of his work as an academic. "The message that the perpetrator is trying to send is that you disagree. We'll get to you, and we will not even be covert about it," he says. "We can do it while the whole world is watching, and nobody can do anything about it because we are so powerful." Indeed, he feels that, I'm sure. And Jared Kushner and Trump have helped him in that regard. My article over the weekend was "War is Coming," and I was speaking about China and the US, and I said if one is to criticize Barack Obama, one would criticize him for being incredibly supine in the teeth of China's salami slicing. The method in Trump's madness is the triangulation of China and a serious ratcheting higher of pressure. Xi is looking more brittle. Look at the work that US Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Peter Navarro have done in and you see the work they've done in the Canadian and Mexican free trade agreements with the anti-dragon clause, and I was referencing also the incident with the USS Decatur, where a Chinese warship came within 45 yards of the Decatur in the South China Sea, and I'm saying that's surely a precursor. And I was also mentioning that B-52s are buzzing China practically daily. Let's move on to the currency markets, with the dollar strengthened on what we considered hawkish Fed minutes. Yesterday I spoke with Gaurav of EGM Futures in Dubai, and he predicted that minutes would be hawkish. The euro 114.94. Dollar index heading towards 2018 highs, 95.69. Japanese yen 112.54. Swiss franc 0.9953. The pound 130.82. That's softening up now. The Australian dollar, which I want to sell, is 0.7122. I see it as a proxy of this US-China war, tariff war, or whatever it's going to be. Indian rupee 73.54, getting some respite from the drawdown in the price of oil. Get to that in a minute. South Korean won 1133.98, Brazilian real 368.70, Egyptian pound 17.8303, South African rand 14.2919. That's another thing I want to sell, but I'm going to be a bit cautious and do one-touch options. Euro dollar 3-month chart 114.97. My target is parity again. Facebook since its IPO, this is from Sun Chartist. I've been a bear for quite a while, and obviously we had that humongous rally after I said sell it, but we're back down below the levels I said when I said sell it. Chart of the day, World Bank ranks each country based on its human capital. Very interesting. The bar is rising for everyone, said the World Bank President Jim Yong Kim. Building human capital is critical for all countries at all income levels to compete in the economy of the future. At the top of the rankings were East Asian countries, territories including Singapore, South Korea, Japan, and Hong Kong. World Bank points to these countries' focus on education in particular as the main driver of their rapid development in the 20th century. Low-income African countries made up the bottom of the rankings, including Chad, South Sudan, as well as Niger, Mali, and Liberia. For the poorest people, human capital is often the only capital they have, indeed. And I remember being quoted by the FT saying, people come to Africa to dig what's out of the ground. The most valuable capital of all is that walks upon it. But it's unleashing it, that's the complexity. Gold, we got up to about 1232, we're back at 1221.50. I don't see it being able to make much headway in the teeth of a stronger dollar. Crude oil had a terrible session yesterday. We're now at $69.58. Settled down 3.02% yesterday, and it's down further. But I'd seen this sell-off coming, but I thought it was going to be triggered by Trump unleashing oil from the Special Reserve. Emerging markets, pay attention to this indicator in China. It typically tends to lead what happens in emerging market economies, especially cyclical and resource-heavy ones, by about a year, and it doesn't look good. This is David Inglis. And this is what I was talking about when I said I'm keen to buy the China EM negative feedback contagion loop, which is what he's referencing. Sub-Saharan Africa, this is interesting. Andrew Corey-Pico is a very interesting writer. It does write from a Russian angle. The Comoros crisis pits China against France off the coast of East Africa. Let me make one point. The link is there, but Xi Jinping has targeted the islands because of the special economic zones that they own. But he's lost control of the Maldives, where he made some significant headway. Interesting article here, take a look. Abiy Ahmed, this is after he appointed half his cabinet of women. Really, he's ahead of the curve, and I wrote about him after about 90 days in office, and I said it's all about speed and velocity. Paul Virilio terms it dromology, which he defined as the science or logic of speed. And he said, whoever controls the territory possesses it. Possession of territory is not primarily about laws and contracts, but first and foremost a matter of movement and circulation. Virilio argues that the traditional feudal fortified city disappeared because of the increasing sophistication of weapons and possibilities for warfare. For Virilio, the concept of siege warfare became rather a war of movement. Abiy Ahmed has moved at lightning speed. The old guard is like the traditional feudal fortified city. He really remains, as I've said severally, the most consequential African politician in my view since Mandela. South African all shares down 11.95% year to date. 10 cent via Naspers has a lot to do with that. Dollar versus Rand, I remember bear, but the place to sell it is around 14. This is a great chart from T Commodity, who's also a seller. Egyptian pound versus the dollar, 17.8303. That's behaved very well, and you've got a tremendous carry there. Nigerian all share down 15.18% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange up 11.94% year to date. The Kenyan Treasury spent 1.4 billion shillings on bailouts through June, settling debt owed to it by three struggling parastatals, including the national broadcaster KBC. And that took me to Monty Python's Dead Parrot sketch, which is essentially what the Treasury is doing. A sports betting firm tied to Arsenal is considering a Kenyan IPO, of course, as a sports PESA. Plans to list on the Nairobi Securities Exchange in the first quarter of next year, according to two people familiar with the matter. The firm has $1 billion of annual revenue, may rank among the 10 biggest companies on the exchange if the IPO goes ahead, said one of the people. Both asked not to be identified because the information is private. The listing would be the first in Nairobi since August 2016, when clothing retailer Deacons began trading. Deacons, of course, has bombed, like many of the other issues that were introduced to the stock exchange. SportsPesa declined to comment on the listing plans. The company said in 2016 it's mulling a listing in 2 years. I've just spoken with Bella at Bloomberg. I'll just repeat what I said to her. I said, look, this is the sweet spot of the economy, betting, ICT. And the economy has been a little bit, notwithstanding that high GDP figure we've been saying, I mean, the evidence on the street is definitely very, very soft, recessionary conditions, credit crunch. This is a sweet spot on an oasis in that desert I just described. I spoke about probably the desire to fend off an arbitrary government of Kenya in the habit of raising taxes willy-nilly, and this probably gives them a better defense. You lock into a tax rate with the stock exchange via the listing. You create all these shareholders and then become a kind of buttress against that kind of behavior. And I also raised the question around politically exposed shareholders. Nairobi all shares down 15.48% this year. NSE 20 is down 25.78% this year. But we've had a 2-day bounce. Let's see if we get some momentum. Base Resources has provided a quarterly corporate development and operational update. That link is on the website. Global titanium dioxide pigment industry remained firm through the quarter, with most Western pigment producers continuing to operate at or near capacity. Net debt reduced by $9.4 million. Have a listen to my interview I did a few months ago with Tim Carstens, who really is, I serve on the board there, and it's been a privilege because he really is an extraordinary individual. Watching somebody build a mineral sands business from scratch has been a privilege. It really has, and he's tremendous. And he's built such a fantastic team. Next step is Madagascar. It's a share you should look at and buy. Finally, let me leave you with the fact that smart paint used in Dubai to absorb carbon dioxide, mineral sand, is a